Hi, I'm Vize. This is medicine.com, and this video will be for downward facing dog. So downward facing dog is one of the most basic poses that you're going to find in any vinyasa or even like hatha yoga class. But the thing about downward facing dog is it's not always accessible to everyone's body the first day they show up at a yoga class. So sometimes vinyasa or hatha yoga isn't a great first place to start. But if you'd like to work on the pose, this is a video to kind of help you find ways to make the pose work in your body and then be able to apply that when you show up at a yoga class or even maybe do one of my other videos. So first we'll just try without any props and see what happens, and I'll show you some variations if you need a little help. So what downward dog looks like is taking your hands and putting them flat on the mat, shoulder distance apart. So you have a square from hand to hand, or a rectangle from each hand and then up into your shoulders. And then in your back, the back end of your body, you're going to separate your feet about hip distance apart and then tuck your toes under. So from here, downward facing dog is when you lift your hips up into the air. So once you start to do that, it's going to be, a challenge, especially if this is new. So don't hold it too long. I'm going to hold it a long time and explain how you're supposed to do this. But for you, if you're new, just take your time, hold it when you can, try some of the things I'm talking about, and then come back down and take a rest. So don't overexert yourself just because I'm holding the pose longer to show you how to do it. So tuck your toes under behind you, lift your hips up. So once you lift your hips up, keep your knees bent a whole lot. Start here. Drop your head down. Press into your hands with straight arms. Now, they say not to lock out your elbows, so just a tiny little bend in your elbows. And from here, press your chest towards your thighs. Like you're really pushing your hands into the ground so you can push your chest towards your thighs. And then you'll start to straighten the knees, but at first you may not be able to straighten the knees all the way. And if you do straighten the knees all the way, you might end up bringing your weight over top of your wrists, which is not what you want to do, because instead of having your hips up now, I have my shoulders and my back high in the sky. So we want the hips straight up. That's like the apex of the triangle. And from here, if your knees need to bend, fine. If they don't, then you can start to straighten them. So with bent knees or with straight legs, it doesn't matter either way. What you want to do is start to press your heels down towards the ground. So when you start to feel that shape, pressing the heels down towards the ground, you're going to feel that in the back of your legs. And while you do that, simultaneously, press your hands into the ground and press your chest back towards your thighs. This is downward facing dog. Now, if you haven't already, please come to your knees. And let me just explain that downward facing dog, it may be a very core, simple shape in the vinyasa and hatha yoga world, but that doesn't make it easy. And oftentimes you'll go to your first yoga class, and at some point the teacher will say, rest in downward facing dog. And you might be laughing to yourself yeah, right. So if you can't rest in downward facing dog and you're in a class and that happens, come to your knees or come to child's pose. Take your rest in a pose you actually feel rest, if that is the intention of the teacher, and then come back when you're ready. Let yourself be new always. That's kind of the hardest thing, because you're going to look different. So you have to stand out when you're new. But try to let yourself be okay with that, because it just is what it is. And a couple of things. So if your wrists are not having downward facing dog, it's good to, and this is not the best prop, a blanket, but something underneath the palms of your hands, because when you first start, there is a prerequisite to doing downward facing dog. And that is if you put your hand flat on the ground, or actually no, if you bend your palm backwards, you need to have at least this much range of motion. If you have this much range of motion, that means when you put your hand on the ground, you're forcing this more range of motion. And then, since sometimes when you're new, you end up bringing a lot of your weight over top of your wrists, you're forcing a whole lot more range of motion that you may not naturally have right now. So what a great thing to do is to just kind of work on that first, is see if you can put a blanket down, put your palms on the blanket, fingers, or maybe even like where your fingers connect to your palms off of the blanket, and see if this can help you take some of the weight off. Now, I find this to be pretty challenging because the blanket is not the best prop. There's other things people do. They roll their mat up or just fold their mat like this, or even do like a roll. Put the palms on that. That might help you. I'm not sure. But they also make a tiny little foam wedge, and that would be ideal for you if you're having this problem and you want to do downward facing dog, but it's just not working in your wrists or creates pain in your wrists. Then look for a tiny little wedge, and so this way you are lifting your palms slightly off the ground, and that's going to help. Another thing is, if you really like to try to press your heels back down behind you, you can put a blanket there and just kind of practice with your knees bent and straight, pressing the heels into the blanket, and then hold it for about 3 seconds and then release. And you're just kind of teaching your body this new programmed motion that you want to get used to doing. So that brings the ground to your heels and just kind of makes the effort not so intense as pushing your heels all the way down towards the ground, especially if your heels are really high off the mat. All right, that's it for down dog for now.